How you doing? My name is State Representative Anthony Nolan, and I am here with the Commissioner of DCF. I'm over here on Hudson, 505 to be exact. This is where the office is, and I'm just excited to be here so that we can talk about DCF, Department of Children and Families. So, hello, Commissioner.
Hey, Rep. Nolan.
How are you doing?
I'm excited that you're here because, DCF is one of those agencies that there's a lot of misperceptions. There's a lot of accurate perceptions of who we are because historically, child welfare kind of sits in that space of, removing or separating children from families or not moving fast enough to do that, to try to keep kids safe.
Yes.
I've seen over the last 30 years, everything in between. So today we can get a chance to talk a little bit about what that is and what we do.
Well, this is the object of Rollin with Nolan. It's a new podcast video that we're doing, and we're going to just start with what is DCF?
Yeah, so the Connecticut Department of Children and Families is kind of under Health and Human Services. If we think about the collection of state agencies that serve families and children across the state, we have about a 3,000 member staff across 14 area offices, 2 children's psychiatric facilities, and a venture-based wilderness school. So if you haven't been out there, I'd want you to check that out too, which has kind of some clinical underpinnings of it too. We have a budget of about $800 million. We are a consolidated agency, which means we handle the child protection side of things, but also children's behavioral health. And so the child protection side, which we'll get into a little bit, typically needs to be as a result of a referral through our care line. Yep. But our children's behavioral health side of our mandate is all children in Connecticut. So we can talk about the distinction of that as we roll through the questions, but that's who we are in a nutshell.
Well, that covers quite a bit of things. We could be here all day, but now some of the things that have come up with families and children, is about the specific services. And you did mention a wide range of services, but what are the ones that hit home the hardest that people ask about or need?
I think what people don't realize is the full gamut of services that DCF provides for communities. We have 99 different service types across several different aspects of what kids and families need. Many of them are direct services to kids themselves, but a lot of them are services to the parents of kids to make sure that we're strengthening their parental capacity, to make sure that they're the best that they can be for their children. To access many of our services, it doesn't necessarily mean going through our 24-hour care line. It can be accessing services that we support through 211, just kind of picking up the phone and dialing 211 and just talking to one of the screeners there about services that they might need for their family. Connecting to CareCT.org. That's connectingtocareCT.org is another website that folks can go to. Click on where you are in the state and behavioral health services in that area will pop up. Another way to be able to access services through DCF is by calling our 24/7 care line. And that's when you have a reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect. And that's 1-800-842-2288.
And I'm sure that line is busy quite often.
About 100,000 calls a year.
Wow.
60,000 of those are accepted for abuse or neglect related allegations that are made related to families. And I will tell you, a very small percentage of those, very small, result in children coming into care. And so I think one of the things that we can dispel right away is that accessing DCF, if you believe that there's a reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect, is a way to get families help. And destigmatizing the need for help or those services that you talked about, there's a way to be able to do that without separating families. And so, a lot of times people think, oh no, if I call DCF, that means the child's going to come out of the home. And that can happen if a child is unsafe, but the vast majority of the time, we are servicing families in home and intact in their community.
And that's something that people were concerned about a while ago. When you heard DCF, everybody always thought my child's going to get taken or something terrible is happening. So there has been a lot of changes, over the last decade in regards to how children are dealt with in regards to removing or not removing.
Right.
Can you expound on that a little bit?
So we have currently, first and foremost, when a call is made to the care line, there's a determination as to whether or not it's accepted. There's a criteria set by statutes by the legislature to determine whether or not it meets the criteria for the definition of abuse or neglect. And then once that's determined, if it's accepted, we have a 2-track system, or what's called differential response in Connecticut, which means lower risk families can be accepted into the department for a family assessment response, in which we go in, we make an assessment with the parent of some of the things that might be needed, and work with the community partner agency to service that family outside of the Child Protective Service realm.
Now you say community partner.
Yeah.
What is a community partner?
So a community partner agency is an agency that is contracted with the department in all of our communities across Connecticut, to work directly with the family to link them up with services in their respective communities that can help from anything, wraparound services for food, clothing, housing, all of those things that might not reach the level of child maltreatment or abuse or neglect, but of a family needing help that came through the door of our care line. That's the family assessment response.
So are you saying that when someone calls DCF because of a possible neglect, that doesn't always mean that the family is getting in trouble. It just means that sometimes the family needs services. Mm-hmm. So DCF is there to provide or help with the services, not really to always come down on on the family. So
that's
it's like
right.
an educational
it's
thing.
Connecting to that community agency to find local services for that family, because it's not helpful for families in New London per se to get referrals for something that's happening in Hartford. The community partner agency is in your community to be able to link families up with things that are closer in proximity to where they might need them. And so every one of our area offices has a hub of a community partner agency that takes those lower risk cases. Now, if the family has more needs, because of substance use, untreated mental health, concerns about family violence, that there are some families that might need a little bit more of an intervention. And in those situations, those go down the investigations track, and they get a traditional investigation with our staff, who again can connect families to services. And in the event that a child can't remain safely at home, we will work with families to, one, identify a relative, because we are very proud in Connecticut to have one of the highest percentages of kids in our care that are placed with relatives, meaning that about 50% of the kids under the age of 18 in Connecticut that do have to come into care are with relatives or someone they know. And that, to me, stabilizes things for the child while the parent addresses the needs that are happening within their family.
Okay. So a child is not particularly removed from the family if there's other family available to stand up for them.
Yeah, we have in Connecticut a very fortunate system that also licenses relatives as we would a typical foster family. So a relative can become licensed, and then a stipend attaches to that child to, meet their basic needs if a child has to come into care. And then if there's no relative available, we have a pretty robust fatherhood program. So that's maternal or paternal family members that can step up. We also allow for kinship placements, and those are people like coaches or teachers or people in community that have a connection to a child that may not be blood related, but that the child knows. We can license them to become a temporary foster placement for a child. And then in the event if there's no one in that category of extended family or friends, we have core foster homes that can meet the needs of kids on a temporary basis, whether they're a traditional foster home. We have foster homes that are medically complex for kids that have medical complexities. We have foster homes that get specialized treatment for clinical needs of kids because they're supported a little bit differently. So if we can't keep kids at home safe, we look for relative or extended family, and then a family. We value kids being in families instead of institutions.
Okay. And everybody always asks, where's the age stop? Yeah. And does the age go beyond 18, or is it only for kids under 18?
So DCF is statutorily mandated from birth all the way through to 18-year-olds. We do have services post-majority in which a child that has been committed to us before the age of 18 can petition the court for us to stay involved after, whether they're in, sometimes kids are in school or they're in a vocational program or just need some help transitioning transitioning to young adulthood, we can stay involved services post-majority, but that's a declaration that occurs before they turn 18. So they can't come in after 18, but they can stay with us after 18 as long as the court kind of sanctions that they need a little extra help. And we've seen that with particularly kids over the last few years because of COVID. Yeah. So you think about kids that might have been in foster care who were trying to hang on in school, but really didn't do so well with remote classes. We've been able to extend their time with us beyond 18 so they can finish up their degree requirement. So we do have the mechanism to stay beyond 18.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, there's been a lot of talk with youth whether or not children or siblings could come to the 211 or call the 800 number because they're concerned about some things that might be going on in the family. Could you touch on that a little bit? Of course.
That 24/7 care line that people can call, again, the number is 1-800-842-2288, is for anyone to call. Obviously there's a set of professionals that the legislature has deemed mandated reporters, and that's within their professional capacity, like police officers or teachers or hospital professionals or folks in community who are mandated to report suspected child abuse or neglect. But then there are citizens or family members, and we encourage those people to make phone calls to the care line if they, see that someone needs some help or have that reasonable suspicion, because those are the people that are closest to the family and that might see things that the professionals might not see behind closed doors, including siblings or other children within the family that might have concerns about what's happening, things that are happening in their household.
Now, you talked about mandated reporters, so teachers, police, emergency personnel. Now, let's use the school system.
Absolutely.
If a teacher sees something and a supervisor or someone tells them, come to me first before you tell DCF, is that teacher mandated to go to the boss first, or do they just call the number?
That's an excellent question. The way the statute reads is that mandated reporters are required to report or cause a report to be made. So if they're higher up within the school system or whatever the district has set in place, has said the policy here is to talk to the school social worker or the school nurse or the principal or administrator before you make the call. You're talking to them about what your reasonable suspicion is with the expectation that they are going to do something with the information. Right. Sometimes school social workers, school nurses, administrators may have more information than that individual classroom teacher who was concerned but weren't sure. So talking to the people within your district, if that is the district policy, is also acceptable. So it's mandated reporters are expected to report or cause a report to be made.
Okay. All right. Can you talk about there's been adoptions and there's foster care. Yeah. What's the difference between adoption and foster care? And is there services that go after that?
Okay. So November, it happens to be National Adoption Month. So across Connecticut to date, we are about 420 adoptions. Lots more reunifications of families. So when you think about, all forms of permanency, there's since we came into this seat, we've had about 3,000 reunifications. So I always balance the conversation of adoption with families that are kind of put back together after there's been separation. But adoption is a form of permanency. Sometimes some of those children that are placed with their relatives are actually adopted by their relatives. So grandma can adopt their grandchild if it goes that route. Last Friday was adoption day, and we had 30 families have their adoptions finalized across the state. And that was pretty cool. The one thing that I do before we make the distinction between foster care and adoption, foster care is intended to be temporary. All the parents meet a set of specific steps identified through the court. And the way the federal law reads, if a child spends 18 of the last 22 months in foster care, the department is compelled to move forward with a level of permanency that could include termination of parental rights. Without going down that road too far, usually you want foster care to be time limited with services provided to the parents to address whatever the unsafe situation is so a child can be reunified. When that doesn't happen, the court can move to a level of permanency like transfer of guardianship guardianship or adoption. Adoption is permanent and is intended to be able to support the child in their development beyond the initial crisis that brought the family to our attention. There are services that are available for families in foster care, but also services that are available post-adoption, like education. We in Connecticut are fortunate to pay the tuition costs up to the state. So our state universities, we pay that tuition cost for kids that have been adopted in Connecticut after a certain benchmark of date that the legislature deemed appropriate for when we pay. The one thing that I did want to raise that I just mentioned was during the adoption day proceedings, one of the adoptive parents, said as she choked up and got really tearful, she said, for as much joy as we have on adoption day, I want to bring into this space the biological parents who had a tremendous loss. And that, as we celebrate adoptions, we recognize that the trauma experienced by bio families who have had to give up their child because of substance use or, unstable mental health or all those things that might result in termination of parental rights. We do have the ability to find permanency and permanent homes for kids, but on the other side of that is a family that has been separated. And we always want to keep them in our thoughts and in the ability to strengthen community so we don't have as many on that side.
So is that a normal, total removal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Connecticut is also a jurisdiction that subscribes to the Quality Parenting Initiative. QPI is a model that links the foster parent to the bio parent. And it's a way to take down some of those walls of foster care and adoption. And in the family that I just referenced, that adoptive family now has a connection to that child's biological family. And so, when you talk about it takes a village, that's the village. When you can expand the child's family and network, even with people that aren't related. And, being a QPI family means that the child's biological parent certainly isn't a monster. It's not someone that the child should be protected from. It's a mechanism to be able to say that the parent may not be able to parent right now because of whatever they're going through, but that they don't have to worry because their child is safe in a foster or adoptive home. And that's powerful, to be able to bring a child into care. But no, so I give you an example. One of our foster parents says that immediately when a child is placed into their home, they do what's called a comfort call, where they have a conversation with the bio family. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm taking care of your child temporarily. Can you tell me what your child's favorite ice cream flavor is? Or how do they get soothed back to sleep if they have a nightmare? And can you send me a picture of yourself that I can put up in their room so they know that we're connected, right? And it sets a completely different tone than I'm taking you from your family and I'm giving you to a stranger. So we're excited about, most of our families engaging in a very safe process of connecting bio families and foster or adoptive families. Sometimes they move to adoption, but other times the families help with that reunification and can be a link if they're struggling or might need a sitter after reunification happens, how best to contact that person and say, hey, do you have a couple hours to help me out?
That is a huge difference from decades ago.
For sure.
Where DCF didn't want to listen. You were accused of this and it doesn't matter. And, that's a huge change. And it is a good way to educate, assist, and service to make it better for the child. And I know that's the concern, the child.
Yeah. So what you may not know about my history with the department is I've worked here 30 years, the last 5 as commissioner, but 22-year-old baby social worker with us kind of came into the department at the time that we had been sued by a class action lawsuit for some of what you're describing. And that is, just not doing right by kids or families at that time. It was a system that was intending to do well, but didn't have the resources to be able to meet the needs of Connecticut's kids or families. So fast forward 30 years later, we, entered into a conversation with the federal court to say we believe that our system is not only strong and different than what it was 30 years ago, but one of the best in the country. And I stand by that. And I had to prove it. And I had to take everything that had happened with administrations before mine to advance our system, to make it better, to really serve the needs of kids and families in a more holistic way, in a way that addresses some of those ills of the past and prove to the court that we were indeed ready to exit that decree. And last year we were able to successfully exit. And, that was a wonderful full circle moment and kind of coming of age for me professionally. If you think of that, brand new social worker in 1992 who came to the department department and then was able to kind of lead it out of that federal lawsuit. So I appreciate the acknowledgement of how far we've come.
That's a huge change for Department of Children and Families. And I know mental health is one of your major components of what you do. And we have now gotten some facilities open for kids. And you were just in New London a couple weeks ago when we celebrated the UCC down there. So could you just share a little bit about the UCC and then close out with, anything that you think is good for us to talk about?
Excellent. So the behavioral health side of who we are as an agency really takes on the needs for embracing who we are within community. And one of the things that we were able to stand up in New London was an urgent crisis center, or UCC, through Child and Family Agency down there. And we cut the ribbon about a month ago now, and they can service kids who are dysregulated or are having a behavioral health crisis that a parent would ordinarily bring a child to the emergency room for on the mental health side of things. So if you can think of a really serious physical injury that you would bring someone to the emergency room for, but maybe a less serious situation to an urgent care center in the community. They're all over the place on the physical side of things. You sprain your ankle during a pickup softball game, you go to an urgent care rather than an ED. The concept here is an urgent crisis center on the mental health side. If you have a kid that's really expressing some dysregulation, just not being able to function at school or community, or things that normally brought them joy are now, they're really struggling with, and the parent just doesn't know what to do on the mental health side of things. There are trained clinicians and doctors and psychiatrists that are in this setting, in community, through Child and Family Agency, that are trained to be able to address that mental health need and link families to services within the community after the initial crisis is assessed. And all roads are pointing to a lot of success, and all of the families and kids that have gone through so far really have positive things to say about this model. You're not sitting for hours and hours and hours. It's not really designed for kids, and you're not seeing all the trauma that's coming through those doors, which we know spending any amount of time in an emergency department sometimes isn't the best place for kids. So the urgent crisis centers are a way to be able to have parents who are struggling with the child's behavioral health need to get some immediate child-focused attention and connection to community-based services when their child's having a tough time.
Well, that's one of the most important things I think that we've done this year.
Yeah, for sure.
Is to make sure that our children have somewhere to go in those emergency situations, because locking up the emergency rooms and having our kids on gurneys out in the middle of, whatever's going on is not beneficial for our kids.
And the legislature acknowledged that coming out of COVID was tough for all families. American Academy of Pediatrics, Children's Hospital Association jointly issued a white paper related to a crisis in children's mental health across the country. So it's an acknowledgement that here in Connecticut, we've recognized that we had to beef up our whole children's behavioral health system to include all of those new service types like we just talked about, to meet the needs of kids and families who are not only just struggling out of the pandemic, but, kids sometimes don't know how to express themselves and where to put the emotions that are bubbling up. This is a way to be able to do that in a child-friendly, child-focused, clinical way.
Yeah. And as you know, there's a big stigma out there about people with mental health, especially brown and black people.
That's right. Yeah.
And I try and share with people, there's nothing wrong with saying that you're having some problems that your family is not usually relate to. And, telling parents, that it's okay to get the help that we need for our children and or yourselves, because mental health is something that happens every day to many people. So, that is something that we really want to get out there, that there are people available to talk to. And being a black commissioner, that is something that I'm sure that, you want people to know.
It is. And before we close out, so if everyone who's listening wants me to repeat some of those contact numbers, I'll do that after this last statement. So if you need to grab a pen to be able to jot down some of the ways to get some of this information that we've shared, you can do that as I kind of wrap up with what you just acknowledged. I am DCF's first Black commissioner. And with that comes a huge responsibility that I'm not the last. How do you set the stage for leadership in these types of positions to make sure that the next ups know that they have what it takes to make sure we can transform systems, particularly systems that are mostly not only in my staff. I have one of the most diverse staff in state government. We just recently passed our affirmative action plan because of the diversity of our staff, but to make sure that diversity extends to leadership in state agencies across the state, because a lot of families and communities that we serve are disproportionately families of color, whether they're our Native population, whether they're Black and Brown families, whether they're Hispanic, Latino families. Those families tend to be overrepresented in our department. And one of the wonderful things that the legislature did in 2018 was to codify DCF's racial justice work. So another good reference to hear all of the racial justice work that DCF has been doing to improve our system as it relates to disparity and disproportionality can be found under legislative reports, DCF's racial justice work. Every year since the legislature put that into effect, we've had to report out on just some of those things that are improving efforts to eliminate disparity and disproportionality so all families can thrive.
Right.
And so the last thing I will say is to reiterate, one, thank you for having me roll in with Nolan to be able to share our 24/7 care line. Yes. Which is when there is a reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect. That's 1-800-842-2288, and callers can remain anonymous. The other number I want to reiterate is if you have an interest in becoming a foster or adoptive parent, that's 1-888-KID-HERO. So that's 1-888-KID-HERO. And then some of the other numbers that I talked about accessing services are, of course, 211 is the easiest one to remember. Connecting to carect.org, where you just put in where you are across the state, and then all of the services will pop up. But those are the main numbers that I want to be able to share with your viewers of how to access help anywhere in Connecticut. And we're certainly happy to be a part of all the work happening down in the New London area, because it's hopping down there.
That's our logo. It's happening. Right. Well, Commissioner, I want to thank you so much for having the time,
of course,
to share about DCF. My name is State Representative Anthony Nolan, and you've heard it from the top, Commissioner Durantes at DCF. Thank you for joining us.